It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer here. We're going to be joined by Ravens beat writer Giana Han from Indianapolis, Indiana. She is there covering the NFL Combine. We'll get her thoughts on what she's seen and heard there so far. We'll also be revealing our Combine crushes. Jonas and I have listed several players that we're intrigued to watch at the Combine and as we get closer to NFL Draft Day. All that and much, much more. But first, a quick word from our sponsors.
If you have an appetite for saving money, then you should get the Rofo Rewards app from Royal Farms. Use the Rofo Rewards app to place mobile orders for pickup or delivery and earn royalty points to redeem for free stuff. And right now, new Rofo Rewards members will get a free any-size coffee for signing up. You can download the Rofo Rewards app at the Apple App Store or Google Play today. You'll find it's a very appealing app to have. Real fresh, real fast. Royal Farms.
The CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament is February 26th through March 3rd at CFG Bank Arena. Baltimore is bringing the hoops, the culture, and the energy. So grab your tickets now and book your hotel at baltimore.org/CIAA.
We're joined by Giana Han in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. Giana, how much coffee have you been consuming this week as you try to stay awake for all of these events, all of these workouts, all of these dinners and conversations in Indy?
It's hard because there's a lot of coffee just available. There are many carafes and whatever you call them when they're hot around, but I haven't consumed as much as you would think. I would say I'm at like 1.5 per day, but also running on not much sleep because the prospects spoke bright and early at 8 a.m. this morning.
Oof. It's brutal.
I didn't know that was how it was pronounced. I always assumed it was something more spicy, exotic, like carafe. But no, it looks like you're right.
Actually, we just had this conversation between the Eagles reporters as well, because one person thought it was carafe and the other said carafe. We can have this argument at a later date.
Yeah. Let's
waste
everybody's good time.
Speaking of high energy people, John Harbaugh talked yesterday at length, along with Eric DaCosta. One of the themes, I think, Gianna, of not just Harbaugh and the Raven sessions, but in general around the Indianapolis scene was all of the Ravens connections, all of the Ravens coaching tree branches kind of spreading out. It was interesting to hear John Harbaugh say that he thought of a anecdote from Nick Saban about how, the older he gets, in some respects, it becomes tougher to find these young up-and-coming coaches and to train them because you are growing into another generation. What did you make of just, what you heard from John about this kind of coaching turnover and what it takes to replenish this coaching staff that was almost by universal decree one of the NFL's best last year?
Well, I think Alabama or Auburn fan, you got to admit any sort of comparison to Nick Saban is probably a good thing. So for the fact that he's getting advice from Nick Saban about having too many coaches get poached is a good sign just for, the reputation of the organization, of people wanting to go there, leaving good positions to go to the Ravens. And as Harbaugh said over and over, this isn't a new thing. Like, you get this every year. Every year you're going to have coaching turnover because people are going to retire, be fired, and there are open positions, there are moves. But I do think maybe he downplayed just how big the significance is, because it wasn't just like a few guys here and there across different positions, different levels. It was pretty much the highest level people on the defensive staff, and the defense was one of the hallmarks of the Ravens season and their success this year. So you kind of lose, especially when you have so many free agents, you also lose the connections, known quantities of players wanting to play with those coaches. But when you step back and look at it, in the end, it is a good thing just overall in terms of reputation of the organization of John Harbaugh for the players, for the coaches. So I think he's focusing on the positive, because what's the point of not focusing on the positive? But there is a little bit more nuance to it than I think that they're willing to say.
Speaking of focusing on the positive, I think a lot of people on Twitter made a bigger reaction out of the comments that were made by DaCosta and Harbaugh about, a lot of the guys that they already have in house, like Gus Edwards, like J.K. Dobbins, like OBJ. They're all saying all these guys are currently under contract until free agency starts. So you expect them to say good things, and they're never going to bash somebody as they head into free agency. But was there one in particular that stood out to you about, DeCosta or Harbaugh being especially glowing about one of these guys that maybe made you think maybe there's a better chance that one of these impending free agents returns to Baltimore than you initially thought?
Honestly, I would say Odell because they didn't just say, "Oh, we like him," or "We're talking to him," but, Harbaugh literally said, "Fingers crossed he's coming back, you never know," and DeCosta's a little bit more reserved about it, but and I'm not saying Odell is going to do this, but he has already made some team-friendly moves, so it wouldn't be insanely surprising if he, for some reason, came back on a low salary that was very team-friendly just to keep building what he said he wanted to build, maybe finish what he wanted to get done. He seems to like Baltimore in regards to Owings Mills in that area and the organization because he hasn't explored that much outside of it yet. But that one, maybe, I feel like it went a little bit beyond just seeing like, oh yeah, like they did good things for us. We'd love to have them back and we're gonna keep talking to them. But again, when we talk about nuance, there's so much nuance to a salary cap. There's so much that needs to get done. It might be a lot more than they expected, but also Matty VK's contract fills up more than enough space of how much room they have.
Another big ticket item, not necessarily for this year, but for next year, Gianna, Adafe Oweh's fifth-year option. They have until later this summer to decide whether to pick it up. It would cost about $13.25 million. So not exactly chump change, but perhaps a deal if you are really high on what an ascendant young edge rusher could be in 2025. It was interesting to hear the Ravens talk about how, they weren't so concerned with the low sack numbers because there are other ways to be disruptive on defense as an edge rusher. They were talking about the pressures. They were talking about the disruptions. They were talking about just how hard Adafe is as a worker. Did that change your thinking at all about whether the Ravens might pick up Adafe's option for 2025?
It certainly indicates they like him a lot. And as we've talked about in the past, I know you've written about actually very recently, it takes a lot to develop a defensive lineman, maybe longer than other skills. So if they like what they have, maybe they would like to bet on a known quantity rather than go out and hope that another draft pick or another young guy who hasn't proven themselves will come in and be able to do what he's done. And he did make me think a little bit, um, there were some times I think he does need to learn to finish. That's going to be huge. But when he got back there, he made some like crazy spin moves, like swung the quarterback around and then just somehow lost him, which was both like terrifying. He's so scary when he's doing that, but also like, okay, you need to fix that. But I was talking to some people also about how, it's hard to stand out when guys like Kyle Van Noy and Jadeveon Clowney, who weren't supposed to be nearly as good as they were, just absolutely stand out amidst you being hurt, being more veteran. So maybe they're seeing things that we don't see in our 15, 20 minutes of availability that is leading to him speaking that highly. But as you also said, Paul, you're going to speak nicely of the players that are on your roster while they're there. So
Yeah. And the Ravens have a lot of work to do on that defensive line, as we know this offseason, because those guys you mentioned, Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy, they're impending free agents. Whether they come back to Baltimore, we'll find out probably in the next coming weeks and months. But as for the draft and the guys that the Ravens could take on the defensive line in the first round and second round, or maybe in the later rounds, you've gotten to hear a few of them talk with the media. Anybody stick out to you, or anything that you've heard in particular stick out to you about some of the talented defensive line prospects that the Ravens could be targeting?
well, I've seen Mizzou's Darius Robinson's name a lot in mock drafts. And it's very early for mock drafts. So we don't even know what they've done in free agency. So who knows? But something that he reiterated a lot that struck me as useful to a Ravens defense is that he's played every He's 0 to 9 across the line. So he has experience everywhere. And when he was asked about, kind of being a jack of all trades and not great at everything, he was very, very vehement that is not how it is. He is just very focused on his craft. But on top of that, he loves watching the Ravens play. He says their style, which is just super hard hitting. It fits him perfectly. The way he was talking kind of echoes the way that a lot of the Ravens talk when they talk about the characteristics of their defense. So that kind of stuck out to me. And then I did think it would be cool story. And this is not biased because they're Penn Staters, but because they're Maryland guys. If Chop Robinson, who I don't know if he'll be there, but also Curtis Jacobs were around. They both grew up very close to the practice facility, talked about growing up and watching the Ravens and just learning from them. And of course, they have Odafe Oweh, who we just talked about as a former teammate who they've learned a lot from. So I don't know. I don't know what value you can put on having chemistry with someone already from college, but they also spoke very highly of the Ravens defense and said they've watched it. And it's just, well, I think the word a Michigan guy used, he was also a little biased because they run a very similar defense, but they say they're changing the game, the way that they run their system.
Interesting. Certainly some bias there, I think you could say, but absolutely. I mean, you're seeing the effects of this Ravens defense and this Mike Macdonald defense around the NFL, and it's only going to probably grow stronger as Macdonald institutes that defense in Seattle. Back in Indianapolis, though, Giana has complete coverage from the NFL Combine on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. Giana, thanks so much for joining us, and hopefully you get some more sleep over the next coming days.
Let's hope and pray. Honored to be here.
All right, Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer here on the Banner Ravens podcast. If you're listening or watching, by the way, give us a like, give us a thumbs up, give us a positive review. We will read it out here on the podcast if you give us 5 stars and a nice thing to say. All right, Jonas, let's touch on our Combine crushes. We are a month away from the draft, but we've got our eye on a few guys.
2 months.
We're going to break this. Yeah, 2 months. Yeah, sorry. Wow, I am way off. We've got our eyes on some guys, and we got to break it down by who is working out on which days. The Combine is broken down by positions. So we'll start with the defensive line / linebackers / edge rushers. Who is your top guy to watch? Who's your Combine crush for this group?
It is a Marylander, a guy who started his career as a
Shocking.
Terp, should have finished his career as a Terp. Chop Robinson. It's not going to be the first cool name guy that I have. I believe his birth name is something like Demion or Damon, but he goes by Chop, so we'll call him Chop. First round pick, maybe early second round guy. Daniel Jeremiah has him as his number 24 overall prospect. When we got Matt Miller on his draft conference call from ESPN last week, he had him as like an early second rounder in that 40 pick range. But he is a guy who, at this point, a lot like Odafe Oweh, another Penn State edge rusher, more tools than production at this point. Only 5.5 sacks in 2022, just 4 sacks in 2023, but really, really impressive athletically. He's got just a wicked first step. You look at the Bruce Feldman Freaks list, which is always a real fun read before every college football season. He ran a 4.47 40 last offseason. He ran the shuttle drill in 4.22 seconds. Those are both 1%er marks for that edge rusher spot for a lot of positions, frankly. He's explosive. He's strong. He's not huge, which maybe could hurt his standing in the Ravens' eyes, because there may be some concern about whether he can hang in there on early downs as a run defender. But he's a guy who, could be one of those guys who, if he does everything that he's maybe thought to be athletically, could be a guy who not only cements that first round grade, but perhaps puts him out of the conversation for, number 30 for where the Ravens are, because the Ravens need an edge rusher. They need someone who can come in, bend that edge. He's the kind of guy who could do that. But if he's, athletic skills and his physical gifts are such that he can't get past, pick 20, pick 25, it might even be just pointless to speculate that he could end up in Baltimore.
Do you know why he's called Chop?
I don't. I do know why our next guy, my next cool name, is named the way that he is. But
Okay,
when you talk
we'll
about your
get to
guy,
that guy.
well, I'll look
Yeah,
it up.
yeah. I'm just going to repeat a story I heard on a podcast, so this could be entirely false. But from what I understand, he was born as like a 14-pound baby,
Yes,
and so they called
you're
him
right.
Pork
Just looking that
Chop.
up.
Yeah.
Have,
So
have I told you how much I weighed when I was a
no.
baby? I was uh, 11 pounds 10 ounces,
Wow, large, and
and
it didn't
then
work out at all
my
because you're
brother.
tiny. You're like 5'8".
I did not play a single snap of high school football or college football.
How big's your
And then
brother?
my brother, 2 years later, my poor mother came out 10 pounds 11 ounces. So
Wow.
no rest for the weary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
women,
Pork
they're the
Chop.
real heroes, right?
Jonas, Pork Chop, Shaffer. Start getting it trending now. All right, my guy is another edge rusher, Missouri edge Darius Robinson, a guy who is absolutely massive, but is like negative 5% body fat. I think he's 6'5", 296. Played 5 years in college, but only 18 combined games in his first 3 seasons. 3.5 sacks in 2022, 8.5 sacks 2023. He's going to rely a lot on his power, from what I understand, and doesn't have a whole lot of finesse, which is a little concerning given how many years he has played in college. But his size and his strength are probably going to be enough to make him a first round pick at some point. All right. Friday, combine day, is defensive backs, cornerbacks, safeties, and also tight ends. We know this Ravens team does not need tight ends. They already have, Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. But cornerbacks and safeties, is there one guy that sticks out to you, Jonas?
It is the aforementioned Mr. Cool Name, Kool-Aid McKinstry, cornerback from Alabama. He's actually a first round prospect who might not be, probably won't be the first Alabama cornerback taken. That's Terrion Arnold, who's supposed to be top 10, top 15 pick. You ask, why Kool-Aid, Jonas? Why Kool-Aid McKinstry? Real name, JaQuincy, but he was nicknamed Kool-Aid by his grandma. Shout out to all the grandmas. Because his smile reminded her as a baby of the Kool-Aid man. So,
Does
yeah,
he come
he
bursting
got
through saying, "Oh yeah," anytime he makes a tackle?
I don't know.
Mm.
Another fun fact is that when my voice sounded differently as a kid, I could do like a really low sounding, pretty good approximation of the Kool-Aid man saying, "Oh yeah." But now when I try to do it, it just sounds like I'm being choked.
Can we
I don't
cut
know
this out of
why
the
I have these
podcast?
fun
This is
facts.
that
Uh,
that is nightmare fuel. That sound.
but yeah, shout out to Kool-Aid because he got a NIL deal with Kool-Aid when he was a freshman
Sure.
at Alabama. I don't know if Pork Chop
Catch up
Robinson
checks.
got anything similar from the like the cattle farmers of Pennsylvania when he was at Penn State, but hopefully he did. But the big question for Kool-Aid is he is a guy with fluid skills, good hips, solid recognition, can play man or zone, but does he have that speed that you want to play, press coverage all the time? Does he have that deep speed? Could you imagine the Ravens using a first round pick, albeit a late first round pick, on a cornerback who is not a 4-4 guy? You think of Marlon Humphrey, you think of Brandon Stevens, both guys who ran well at the combine. Obviously, Brandon Stevens not a first round pick because of how new he was to the position, but with how aggressive the Ravens like those quarterbacks to be, do they trust a guy like that who doesn't have elite top end speed? At least we think. And how much can this combine go to help his stock and show people that for as skilled as he is technique wise, he also has the athletic tools to really profile as a potential day one starter?
I'm gonna go off day one, maybe off of day two, and go to a day 3 prospect. I'm gonna show off just how much I know about the NFL draft here, Jonas. I'm gonna go for my Friday combine prospect, Miami defensive back James Williams. Now he's listed as a cornerback, or he's listed, I should say, as a safety, but I think he could probably play cornerback. He could probably play linebacker. We know in this defense, players who are versatile can go far. We saw it with Kyle Hamilton. And this guy is big. He's 6'5", 224. He's probably expected to test very well. Led Miami with 73 tackles. He comes downhill very fast, hits running backs in the hole. I could see him serving a lot of different roles on this defense. And if it only costs a 4th or 5th round pick, he could be a developmental prospect. He's expected to need to add some bulk, but he could probably do that while Brandon Stevens and Marlon Humphrey are starting at cornerback, while Trenton Simpson starting at linebacker. He can fill a lot of different roles for this team, but may need to develop a little bit. So James Williams, Miami defensive back. All right. Saturday is the quarterback, wide receiver, running back group. This is a fun skill position group. Jonas, who is your guy to watch?
Keon Coleman, wide receiver from Florida State. He's big. He's strong. He had one of the best catches you'll see, in any season. Just kind of leaping one-handed grab over the middle, like 30
He has
yards
like 4 of
downfield.
those.
Just
I've seen
yeah,
like 4 highlight worthy catches by this guy. Unbelievable.
and he didn't really have the type of production that you would expect for a guy with as many holy shit. Did you see that kind of catches? Like 50 catches, 658 yards, 11 touchdowns. Obviously, that red zone production really stands out. There's speculation that he was dealing with a hip injury or groin injury, something in the core muscle area. Toward the second half of last year, his play kind of fell off a little bit. He dealt with that at Michigan State, so that could be a red flag. But I think the big question for him, especially when you project him as a possible Raven, is, does he have the kind of straight line speed to separate? I think Lamar has had an issue with like throwing those 50-50 balls. We talked about Lamar not being a guy to give guys a chance on back shoulder throws. We know you have to have that trust level that he has with guys like Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and those are maybe kind of apples to oranges because those guys are over the middle. Like, are you going to be a guy who can, if you're not separating, be someone that Lamar is going to trust you to, like, F it, he's open somewhere,
Yeah.
I'm going to go throw it to him. But it sure would help Keon Coleman if he runs, faster than a 4.55 or faster than a 4.66. You don't need at his size to be a burner, to be a really, really good player. Mike Evans coming out of Texas A&M only ran a 4.53 40, and he's had, how many 1,000-yard receiving seasons in a row. But because of the concerns about his separation, because even some of the concerns about his contested catch ability, I think he's going to have that extra definition as an athlete. And if he runs a good 40 time, if he does well in some of these agility drills, which he should do because he was fluid enough to be a punt returner at Florida State, which is a pretty high bar for an athlete, I would imagine that you'll see a lot of mocks, having Keon Coleman to the Ravens at number 30.
I think we saw the potential of that type of body type and what he can do with Lamar Jackson in what we saw in the second half of the season from Isaiah Likely, that jump ball ability. But at the same time, it did come back to hurt Lamar in the playoffs when he threw that jump ball up in the end zone against the Chiefs that Isaiah Likely was calling for. So, it's a matter of building that trust with his pass catcher. I like Keon Coleman for that reason, because I think he would bring something different to the table than what Rashad Bateman or Zay Flowers would bring. I'm going to go with another Florida State guy. This guy's a running back. It's Trey Benson. And if you're looking for a pure Gus Edwards replacement, assuming Gus Edwards is going to leave in free agency, I think it's this guy, because Gus Edwards is 6'1", 238, and Trey Benson is 6'1", 223. He's big, he's strong, he's powerful. He's not as elusive as some other guys in this category who are probably going to go on day 2, these other running backs. I really like Oregon running back Bucky Irvin, who's a totally different back, who's like very elusive, makes guys miss. But I think there's probably a little bit of overlap in skill set there with Keaton Mitchell, who's expected to come back at some point during the season. Trey Benson, not a great pass catcher, only caught 33 balls in college. Doesn't have a whole lot of tread on his tires, only 2 years as a starter. He's probably going to be a day 2 to day 3 guy, like a second, third, fourth round pick. But Trey Benson out of Florida State would be my guy. All right, Sunday, the final day, offensive lineman. Jonas, who is your camp or combine crush, I should say?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Benson because he was a guy who I had in my mock draft that went up on Monday. I think I had him as a fourth round pick. And you're right about the Gus Edwards comp. He is probably a more souped up Gus Edwards. Just he's faster to go from 0 to 60. Probably a little bit more elusive too. But the guy that I had the Ravens taking first, number 30 overall, was Washington tackle Troy Fautanu. a name that you're probably going to have to look at a couple of times to get right pronunciation wise. But he's a lock at this point, I think, to make it as a first round pick. Probably won't make it eventually to number 30. You see him going in the middle of the 10s. You see him, getting snapped up in the early 20s. But the big question on him is size and where he projects. Are you going to use a first round pick on a guy who might only be a guard or whose best position is as a guard? He's not tall, probably going to measure in under 6'4". He's not super heavy right now, probably going to come in around 320. So how long is he going to be? It helps to have those levers, those tools to keep guys off of you. The average arm length for an offensive tackle is about 34 inches. So if he comes in anywhere close to that, I think that would be a good sign for him and a pretty good sign to teams that, like, hey, this guy could really hack it as an NFL tackle. But even that, if he comes in with short arms, that might be to the Ravens' advantage if they think that he can still make it as a tackle eventually. Because, you look at someone, Rashawn Slater, who's a top pick by the Chargers. He was an all-pro as a rookie, and he had 33-inch arms, 13th percentile for the position. Penei Sewell, obviously a much bigger guy than Rashawn Slater, a bigger guy than Troy Fautanu, but still 33 and a quarter inch arms as the 18th percentile for tackle. So it is not necessarily a deal breaker for certain teams. It's not a deal breaker for quality in this league, but for a guy of his proportions, I think you do get very curious about just how he measures up relative to certain benchmarks that teams might have for that position.
Fautanu may not be big. He may not be tall. He may not be heavy. You know who is big, tall, and heavy? That'd be Georgia offensive tackle Amarius Mims. 6'7", 340 pounds. This guy is massive. Needs development according to scouts. But if he can sit behind Morgan Moses, if he can sit behind Ronnie Stanley, and learn for a year or two, and then eventually take over at one of the spots, left tackle or right tackle, that's a worthwhile investment of a first-round pick. He's probably going to be a first-round pick, but if he slips into the 20s, maybe Amarius Mims is the pick for the Ravens, and it might not be as sexy as, Keon Coleman or some other, skill position players, but if you can take a quote-unquote franchise, left or right tackle in the first round, you'll take that investment even if he has to sit for an entire season. All right, Jonas, lot more NFL draft coverage to be determined because it's 2 months away, not 1 month away. I've got my months just all mixed up. Can we just skip through March? That'd be ideal.
No, because March Madness, bro.
March Madness.
Actually, neither of our teams is going to be in March Madness. Although Syracuse women,
yeah, Syracuse men,
probably
I'll tell you,
women
might get to 20 wins. So don't just count them out just yet. Joe
Okay.
Lunardi loves
All
to keep them on the bubble. And so long as they're there, you never know. All right. That just about does it for the Banner Ravens podcast here today. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I am at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Thanks so much for tuning in. Like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll have another episode this Tuesday as Jonas and I will present our plans for Eric DeCosta this offseason. Essentially, how to navigate a perfect and execute a perfect offseason for the Baltimore Ravens. We'll have competing plans. Maybe you can decide who you think has the better idea going forward. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you Tuesday at 11 a.m. See you then.